this week's program. We're going to be talking about vineyards and the history as far as Lincoln University is concerned. We're also going to be looking at feed budgeting because of the drought and the dry that's still hanging around. And also we're going to look at the transition between summer feeding and that into the winter. But in just a moment, it's Farm Accounting with Kerry Adams. Kerry, the government keeps making announcements. What's the latest one?
Yeah, we've had a pre-budget announcement come out. They're going to put $22 million into a new government unit, which is going to be out to sort of go against cyber crime.
Against it?
Yep, so last year it cost the country $250 million worth of lost money, and 800,000 people were affected, so they've come up with this idea they're going to have a new unit as from the start of next year, and their idea is to go out and stop cybercrime and basically protect New Zealand, because we're heading more into a digital age, and they want to make sure that we're well protected, and the idea of this unit is to stop it.
It scares the living daylights out of me when I push a button and send my credit card number somewhere.
Yes, and this is what they're trying to sort of go up against. It's also things like denial of service attacks, which is one of the most basic things you can do. So you get a whole pile of people and they just attack a particular website, and because it gets bombarded with everyone at the same time, it just goes down. So it could, an obvious example would be you could try and target IRD if you're really going to try and be aggressive. They've got good security, but enough people doing this at the same time could bring the whole site down. And especially if you did it right on, say, GST time, it'd create a nightmare for everyone out there. So, it's important that they get on top of this.
This cybercrime, I mean, it's totally faceless, isn't it?
Yep, it can be anyone, anywhere. And the reality is it's pretty simple to do in some cases. A simple search of the internet will give you some clues on how to do some things.
I don't want to know.
Well,
I have enough trouble with doing my own stuff.
Yeah, but then they've got your more sophisticated, a lot of them are the younger sort of grads that have spent a bit of time on computer science, and they've got together and they've come up with a bit of a scheme and they put it out there to try it. And so this unit will be after them. So
$22 million. These people in the IRD are going to, or the government I should say, yep, they're going to be targeting. They're going to be coming onto everyone else's computers to find out who's doing what.
Not necessarily going onto them. They're just going to be there as a unit to stop it. So the idea is if they get a sort of report, they'll be chasing it up, trying to find out more behind it and work out how to protect New Zealand in the long run.
Oh, good luck to them, because it's international, of course.
It is, yes. And most of the attacks do come from overseas, but there's no reason why it couldn't come from a homegrown person either.
Yeah, scary stuff. Kerry, I'm going to say that there's a lot of people who have an opinion that accounting is a very expensive part of their budget.
Yes, it can be. And the reality is that we all get the question of how do we save money? You're getting too expensive. I don't want to pay for what you're doing.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't see what you do.
No, they don't see behind the scenes. All they see is the stuff go in, and we give a whole pile of paper at the end and say, here's your tax bill or your tax refund. They don't realise all that extra work that's there. There's a lot of things that people can do to actually save some money in the long run. The first thing is every accountant in New Zealand sends out a questionnaire to every taxpayer saying, this is the information we need. Signing it and returning it is not going to help you. It's actually going to cost you more, because the accountant will have to go through all your records or come back to you and ask for more information. The key is actually fill out everything possible. It's going to be quite long. Some of them are sort of anywhere between 7 to 12 pages long, and it asks for a lot of information, but if you don't give it, then you end up having to spend more time on it. So if you can go through, fill it out completely, then you save money. It takes your time, but your time's cheaper than paying an accountant to do it.
Oh, I bet. Is it simple as just as going through all your bank accounts?
Like one of them will be, have you got all the bank statements? We need all of those. So you go through and make sure you've got 12 months worth of bank statements. Now, if you've been doing it right during the year and you've been filing them, in a filing cabinet every time you receive one, then it's not going to be a problem. Or you can easily go into online banking and actually download it all as well into an electronic document. And if accountants are on top of everything, they'll actually have something called a portal that you can upload to for them. So you don't even go to the post office or go in to see them. You actually do sit at home and on the farm and just upload it to the accountant's server.
Is it too simplified to sort of say, adding up from your bank statements, I've spent this amount on fuel and this amount on fertiliser and this amount on...
Yeah, especially for the end of year type stuff, that's exactly what we need. So come to the end of the year, you owe bills to everybody. If you go through and say on my bank statement, these are all the people that I paid in the month after the end of the year, then that's all we need to know. You don't have to sort of go and, in most cases, provide invoices, because accountants don't want a whole pile of paperwork. It just clogs up our office, and we've got better things to do, have all that sitting there.
Paper is actually disappearing into history.
It is, yeah. I'd say probably at least 40% of our clients don't actually have any paper copies anymore. A lot of it's on electronic, which is great for them because they don't have to store it in their small shed or whatever, and we don't have to store it in our office hoping that someone will come and pick it up, or we go and deliver it off to them.
Because there's that 7 years of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, you've got to have the 7 years of records there. And a lot of people forget that, and of course they start running out of space, or they're cleaning up and they dump a couple of years.
Or they shift.
Well, yeah, shifting the other way, and that's the worst thing, is that all those records you've got to take them with you. But you've got to have it.
And then you've got to say, which box are they in?
Yes, yeah.
So really, basically, the way to save money with your chartered accountant is to give them as much information as you can glean from your bank statements.
Definitely, yeah. The more you can give us without us having to hunt for it, the cheaper it is.
Power, for example, and you guys will work out the percentage for house versus irrigation.
Yeah, now in that case it's ideal if you sort of have it paid at two bills, so that on your bank statement it goes through as, the irrigation on one and the actual house is separated out. Otherwise we're going to have to go through all your power bills, or you've got to spend the time saying every month this is what I paid for the house. Whereas if you do it as 2 payments, it's really simple and easy.
So that's the easiest thing to do, you keep it simple.
Yep. And the same with your computer software, the more information you put into it, the easier it is for us.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
John, obviously a lot of kerfuffle. Panama is now a word that everybody is using. Is it too simple to say that a lot of what's being pinpointed was because we had high interest rates and people were pouring money in here to get the interest rates?
Well, that's part of the picture. I mean, the problem that the Reserve Bank has, it has a difficulty in the housing market, so it can't actually lower interest rates easily without stimulating the housing market. But the money you mentioned coming to New Zealand because of high interest rates is looking for a home, so it goes into the housing market, putting pressure on house prices. So it's all part of this picture where the pieces are connected. There's lots of moving parts, but the outturn is high house prices, high currency is bad for the real part of the economy that relies on doing stuff and sending bills out to people, rather than the rentier part of the economy that relies on asset price appreciation and says, well, you know, anything that might threaten asset price appreciation is completely unacceptable. In the meantime, earning a living becomes more and more difficult.
The main thrust of the media at the moment, though, is tax evasion, and we're a tax haven, which is something totally different.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen quite a, it's what do we mean by tax haven? You know, arose by any other name. So one politician might say, we are not a tax haven. Another might say, we are. The definition of tax haven underneath that becomes a thing to debate. So if we help people hide their identity, if in hiding their identity they evade tax somewhere else, we are still part of that nasty, dirty part of the system. And really, I've heard lots of politicians on the right and on the left say, we need open and transparent information. You know, we've got the US government wanting Apple to break the codes on the iPhone.
Yeah.
But when we say, well, actually, we want everything to be open and transparent, maybe that's not such a good idea. And so we've got an issue that says, when things aren't open and transparent, there's a question mark. And the more things aren't open and transparent, the bigger the question mark. And if we are part of that system which encourages, supports, or allows identities to be hidden, then we are part of that system, and that can damage our reputation. And Peter Dunn said yesterday that if we get the reputation as a tax haven or part of that system, that could be as bad for New Zealand as foot and mouth in the primary sector.
I don't understand that.
Well, what he's saying is that foot and mouth would damage the primary sector, and having
That I can understand.
So the effect on New Zealand is we find it difficult to transact in the world. All our transactions are double checked by everybody. I'll give you an example. Here's a thing that we do to make sure our customers in the US pay a minimum amount of tax, because we pay tax in New Zealand. So we used to fill in a one-page form. That one-page form essentially said, under the tax treaty we pay 5% tax, and we can give that to our customers and they don't pay a large amount of tax on our products. In February this year, that one-page form turned to a 8-page form, and it asks questions like, are you a non-participating FFI, including an FFI or an FFI related blah, 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 blah.
You're right, straight through to the wicket
So
keeper.
there's 2 inches of paper to read to work out what this is about. To understand it, to answer that question, I have to understand the question. And this is the US tax authority, the IRS. So the tightening up across the system starts to make it more difficult for the bad people to do the things, but it makes it more difficult for the people who are just doing the day-to-day business.
Yeah.
So if there's a big question mark, or if the question mark grows against New Zealand, we won't be able to take part in things like tax treaties. And that's the threat. So if you like, to do business, we need a reputation. If that reputation is damaged, that damage could be equivalent to the damage we talked about in the primary sector. So it's that, I think, is probably overstating it in terms of Peter Dunn, but he's making a point that it's important, because we don't see it, because it's not entirely obvious. The fact is, 9 pages, 8 pages, 1 page, complicated, not complicated. It could all get more complicated as a result, and that's bad for the income statement of businesses that I was talking about.
Oversimplification, why don't we just tax it and say if you earn the money in New Zealand, you get taxed?
Well, we do. But we're talking about the money in the US. So I'm non-resident in the US, I'm selling products in the US. Those products would be taxed if I was resident in the US. Because I'm tax resident in New Zealand, I pay the tax in New Zealand. So I don't want to pay it in the US because I'd be paying it twice.
Okay.
Hence the tax treaty. And hence the reputation of New Zealand being important when we're talking to the IRS.
How are the world markets going?
Soft and difficult. Oil's in the mid-40s, it's up a bit. China, domestic and export demand is soft. That's the ongoing worry. We have good days, we have bad days, but we certainly haven't recovered to where we were late last year.
And New Zealand?
New Zealand's got that perennial problem in terms of the rock and hard place that our policy frameworks got us between. We opened talking about money coming in chasing high interest rates. That money may be finding its way into the housing market, may be hidden by some foreign trust, compounding the tax issues. Where we are now is the economy is soft. Given just that bit of information, the Reserve Bank should be cutting interest rates, which takes some of that pressure off the exchange rate, but clearly in an overheated housing market puts more pressure on the housing market. And so that dilemma now exists, the rock and hard place of interest rates. So what does the governor do? Does he cut and see problems in the housing market? Does he not cut and see problems in the real economy? Well, you know where my vote would be straight away. Let's sort the real economy out. But more fundamentally, it's the policy framework. That policy framework needs, you know, the things that we saw in the 60s and 70s. You went to borrow money to buy a house. How much do you earn? 2.5 times that. So that's a loan to income limit. By breaking the value of lending away from income, what we've allowed is this asset price explosion. And I think those macro-prudential controls, like the loan to value, we need to be moving towards income to value type loans, or that type of control. So it's an asset that can earn, or it's your earnings, and that's what limits how much you can borrow to buy the asset.
John, thank you very much indeed, as always. And oversimplifying it for us, which is great. In just a moment, though, we're going to be talking about irrigation and the fact that it's still very, very needed. Tony, we're still very much involved with irrigation, and we really are in trouble, aren't we?
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult, especially ducking into winter. I mean, we really are sort of only a month or so away from what is, you know, typically the winter months, June, July, August. We've got everybody in the last 7 to 10 days has had to irrigate. We suspect that might still happen again before we get to June. Particularly if we look at the weather pattern going out another 10 days or so, where we're going to have above average temperatures, below average rainfall. Well, actually, if you look out 10 days for the eastern parts of New Zealand, we're going to have very little in the way of rainfall. There's going to be another stack up again next week on the west coast. So yeah, look, you know, we've got a problem. A problem, I guess, is that, you know, we're having to irrigate at times of the year where we don't normally expect to irrigate, but we're getting response because we're still growing.
Are people having to dig deeper bores?
Yeah, look, through Canterbury and especially in Canterbury, for example, not far out from Christchurch, we've got people with 30-metre bores that are struggling to get house water, and are going to have to put deeper bores in, probably go to 70, 80 metres to try and get a more reliable source of water.
Do they need a permit for that?
Yeah, they'll just be able to get a change of condition that allows them to drill deeper. I mean, they've already got a permit to take the water, and it's just basically informing Environment Canterbury that they're going to drill deeper because it's a permitted activity anyway. They're only taking the permitted activity, so that's not a big deal for them, but it's just the cost of doing it. I mean, to go down to 70 metres with a 100mm bore or an 80mm bore is still another 20 or 30 grand that you've got to find to do it. And if you go into parts of eastern Wairarapa, for example, the townships there are even struggling to get water. So that's a real issue, and eastern Wairarapa's absolutely grey. It's dead grass not even there. So it's grim there. It's grim in North Canterbury, and there's parts of south of here that are just in much the same place.
And it's certainly not over yet.
And it's not over yet. If you look out at the NIWA long-term forecast, for example, the next 2 or 3 months, they're expecting these weather conditions to continue, above average temperatures and below average rainfall on the east coast, particularly southern east coast of the North Island and this part of the east coast of the South Island, to remain pretty much the same.
Sucking water out of the ground is pretty expensive when you look at the electricity costs.
Well, it'll be hammering the budgets pretty hard, because we don't normally expect to be irrigating at this time of the year. And while we're not putting very much water on, that 10 millimetres is still costing money, and depending on whether you're pulling from deep bores or shallow bores, there's still a cost associated with it. Much more when you're up the plains, of course, but you know, that 10 millimetres to put on in a couple of days under a centre pivot up the plains might cost you anything from about $500 to $1,500 to actually apply.
Now, NIWA is suggesting it's going to be a warmer and drier than normal, whatever normal may be.
Yeah, whatever the norm is, but I mean, basically we can expect, you know, I mean, we all think about June and July as being some of the, you know, heading into some of the cooler months of the year and getting some rainfall and maybe a snowfall or two. And if it's warm, of course, snow's probably not very likely. And but I mean, it's the precipitation we need. I mean, we're really in a hole for dryland properties, particularly.
Certainly is a very strange season. After the break, we're going to be talking to Warwick Green, and no doubt he'll be giving us some advice on what we should be doing because of the dry.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things. Make a positive change to the planet. To feed the world. To protect the future. To live well. To be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
Warwick, it's very, very dry out there, so I guess feed budgeting is very important.
Certainly, Rob. I mean, I think probably much of the South Island is under fairly dry conditions. I mean, the West Coast have plenty of rain. But you know, down on the farm, I mean, we're coming to the crunch time. You know, temperatures are cooling, and obviously the level of growth we're getting is reducing really. So whatever winter feed or saved pasture that farmers have got, they need to treat it with basically a fair bit of care in terms of
just meter it out.
Metering it out, and very important that you do a feed budget. That's the first thing, and that you get an idea of how many kilograms of dry matter you've actually got in the field. So whether it's fodder beet or kale or winter brassica or whatever, or grass, please can't emphasise how important it is to do a dry matter assessment across the paddock. Easy enough to do, just a metre square and weigh it, and you can use, you know, a simplistic calculation of, you know, the percentage of dry matter and get what it normally is, you know, 15-20%, and get an idea of how many kilograms of feed you've got.
The other thing is very, very dry, so nitrate poisoning is right out there.
It is, Rob, if farmers have been pushing it along with nitrogen in the early mid-autumn. And of course, these cloudy days and pretty dry conditions, you're bang on. It's a recipe for disaster, and especially on, it doesn't matter what crop you've got, if you've pushed it along, you do have to watch nitrate. Yeah. I
mean, if you're doing fodder beet, for example, you're recommending that you give them some bulk beforehand?
Oh, look, transitioning, I mean, in all brassicas there's a transitioning phase. In fodder beet, it's even more important that you transition over probably a 2 to 2.5 week period. Start off very small, 1 to 2 kilos a day. Make sure before you put the animals in there they've actually got a level of gut fill, so they've had silage or hay, and then you can put them in, and slowly they will take to the crop. And basically what that's doing, you can slowly increase it after every sort of couple of days, is that the rumen is effectively adjusting to the new feed. And so as time goes along, they'll effectively adjust to the new feed, and you'll be fine after a couple of weeks. I mean, I'm busy doing it at home myself. You know, we've got the first mob of Angus calves on at the moment, and they're just getting it very, very carefully, very quietly, and you know, you won't see any problems. So it's just it's quite a process.
Has the velvet leaf thing slowed down? Is it?
Well, I think from MPI's perspective, they've done a pretty sterling job, really, getting right around the country, inspecting all the paddocks. They've identified all the paddocks around New Zealand. So that phase is eased off. I think one of the key things that they're talking about at the moment is obviously when you're grazing, or you've got, like, dairy farmers are taking cows onto somebody else's farm to graze it, and that paddock's been identified as having had velvet leaf. Before you remove the animals, they're talking about giving them a standoff period to allow that seed to pass through the animal,
right,
so that it's not transferred from one farm to a jolly another farm. And that's a pretty important area, because a lot of spreading of these noxious or you know, unwanted weeds is via the animal.
Is it going to affect seed supply for next year?
Well, I mean, from the perspective of phytosanitary and introducing seed of the genus Beta, which is beet, all seed lots are going to be inspected, and they're going to have to go through a pretty rigorous inspection process at the port of entry.
Even those that are coated?
And the coated especially. So, likely to slow down the process, but I think individual companies are working obviously with MPI to make sure that there will be a process clearly in place. I don't think it's going to stop the availability of seed, certainly not. There will be seed available. Maybe some of those lines that of seed that have been used will be a problem, but for most of the varieties it shouldn't be an issue.
Goody. Now I guess you're planning for spring.
Well, hey, we're sort of getting through May, and we've got to get through winter yet. But look, seriously, a lot of farmers are now already talking about spring, and they're talking about ordering their seed supplies, especially for, like, the beet. In the early days, a lot of the beet was already effectively signed up in May. So there's quite a lot of advanced planning required, and I think farmers do need to think seriously about what are their requirements going to be for the next spring, summer. I mean, the forecast is talking about, I think, for the East Coast of both islands, a fairly wet spring and wet summer. Now, hey, whether that's true or not, we'll wait and see.
We don't have one of those crystal ball things, do we?
No, we will just have to wait and see. But I mean, it's very dry at the moment, and you know, stock are under a level of pressure, so we've just got to watch them pretty carefully.
And just keep an eye on those budgets.
Yeah, and I mean, financially, I mean, a lot of farmers are under the pump too, and I mean, you know, there's been grazing options that have been lost as a consequence of dairy, and obviously other situations. So it's time for being, you know, pretty careful and resilient.
Just keep it really tight.
Just focus
Warwick,
on
thank you very much indeed.
Cheers.
Very, very shortly, we're going to be taking you out to Lincoln, who started all this grapevine business. Glenn, Lincoln University is heavily into the wine industry.
Yes, Lincoln's been actually one of the places where the wine industry started back in the 70s, in Canterbury anyway. It was David Jackson and the people around him who thought that maybe Canterbury could grow quality wines, but nobody had actually tried before that point. So back in the mid-70s, David Jackson planted the first vines and got fruit on them and made them into wine just to test and see whether they'd make a decent wine or not. So it's one of the only areas in the world, if not the only area in the world, where the research actually started first and the industry in Canterbury started after that research. It was because of that research it actually started. Usually the industry starts someplace and then the research follows. So it's a little unusual in that way. So we've been going for a long time.
So you're producing people who can work in the vineyard as well as get into the winemaking proper?
Yeah, we produce people who can act in all aspects of the vineyard and in the wine industry. It's really winemakers and viticulturists who do the real work in making the wine, but also all the people around that, the suppliers, the technicians, everything. Our students have gone in all sorts of directions, including into wine writing and being wine critics. So we've actually had Masters of Wine who've come and done the program, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about it, because Master of Wine is one of the most preeminent wine qualifications in the world. But they come here because they want to learn about how stuff is made, not just about the final product.
You're pretty hands-on.
Yeah, we try to make this program as hands-on as we can. We have quite a limitation in terms of the amount of time versus the amount of information that people need to really get. So we try to make sure that there are linkages between our lectures, and we do that in our laboratory programs. For example, in this vineyard, we assign a pair of students to a row, and it's their job basically to look after those grapes, get them ready for harvest, make a winemaking plan, and then take it all the way through into a bottle. And at the end of the academic year, we have a bit of a tasting, and people will taste the wines blind, so they don't know who made them, and they'll critique them, and they'll say what's good and bad about them, and then eventually somebody will own up to the wine and say, this is my wine, and these are the issues we had making this wine. This is how we, corrected the mistakes we made, and this is what we, wished we'd made versus what we actually made. And it's really, really instructive.
And of course, this industry is very subject to climate.
Yeah, season is really important in winemaking. It's one of those things that, as a farmer, any farmer, you have to deal with what's given to you. And so we have no control over the weather. So really what our program is about is trying to say to students, okay, you need to know how the grapevine responds to the environment in order to best manage it. And so that's really what we're trying to do. And that's dealing with things like changes in the weather, hot seasons, cold seasons, wet seasons, early frosts, late frosts. The best way to deal with these things is by knowing what the vine does, and then how to deal with the fruit once it comes into the winery.
Now, you're also doing research. What are you up to there?
Yeah, my research program is really centered around changes we make in the vineyard and then how that affects the final product. So my research trials start in the vineyard and they actually finish in the bottle. And we've done a lot of studies where we've changed the grape environment through the use of reflective mulches to try to change the light environment coming back up to the grapes from the ground. We've done lots of leaf removal type treatments and shoot trimming type treatments. Just over behind us, the vines that have the net on them are part of a rootstock trial that's been running for 10 years. So we're doing lots of different things, and wherever possible, we always take that to the wine and then have some tasting the wine or some sorts of measurements on the wine to see what the real effects are.
And now, of course, wine varies within a type, so it must be a very interesting sort of an industry to be in.
Wine is a great product because quality is in the eye of the beholder. So wine is a good wine. It really depends on who's tasting it, and what their experiences are, and what their expectations are. And there's so much variety in different types of grapes, and then even within a type of grape, there's different wine styles that can be made from it. So it's really a very broad palette, and that's why I think winemaking is still, it's part science, but it's really a lot of art. It's up to the grape grower and the winemaker to make the grape and then make the wine that they think is best for those grapes, and then hopefully to find a consumer that wants to buy it and enjoy it again and again.
Because as an industry, there'll be lots of jobs for people finishing your course.
Yeah, the job market is still pretty dynamic. There's an increased need for people who really understand how grapevines grow and react to the environment, and then also how to deal with grapes when they come into the winery to make the desired wines that people want. So our program is aimed at trying to give people the skills and the knowledge base to be able to do that. And our students have ended up all over around the world, working in hot climates, cool climates, and challenging climates, and it's very gratifying to see how they've been doing around the world as they grow and mature into their own unique winemaking style.
And of course, they put their personalities into their wines.
That's why winemaking is really much of an art, because the standard practices, students will graduate with all of their academic learning and the practical stuff that they learn here, and then the real learning process begins when they go out into industry and they start working in vintages. Many times students will hemisphere hop, so in order to get more experience in a tighter time frame, they'll do a vintage in New Zealand, and then they'll go up to the northern hemisphere and do a vintage there, and they'll hop around back and forth for a number of years to get the experience in different environments, different grape varieties, different styles of winemaking. And in that process, they develop their own thinking about how wine should be made, and therefore they have their own signature in their wine, which is really a great thing. And you know, we talk about terroir and the influence of the environment on the grapes and the wine, but the winemaker is part of that too, a very important part.
Indeed, a fabulous industry, and one that I can understand why so many people are getting involved with. In just a moment, we're going to be talking about things you need to know when you're setting out your irrigation scheme.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
Phil, air release vacuum breakers, who and what?
Yeah, Rob, we import from a sister company in Spain these air release valves. Really it's its primary use, which is about trying to get rid of and eliminating air out of pipelines. Now you might think, oh, well, why would you do that? Well, part of the reason is that where velocities are very low, you can end up with a whole lot of air actually entrapped in a main line. And what it will do is it actually cause you a couple of things. One is high pressure losses at certain points. And the other thing is that with air entrapped in a pipeline, of course, when you take the pressure off, it expands. Mm-hmm. So you can end up with, where you've got very fast closing valves, you end up with water hammer.
What's water
as
hammer?
A result. It's basically where the pipe starts shaking and everything, because the energy has to go somewhere. Where a valve is closed off, the energy, and it starts bouncing. And of course you can imagine in a pipeline that's doing this sort of stuff, it's expanding and contracting.
It's not going to do it any good.
It limits its lifespan to a degree if it's outside of the elasticity of the product.
So these things are burpers. They burp the pipe.
They burp, yeah, effectively. And we've got a couple of types. We've got a simple unit, which is this one here, And effectively what happens is that when you start up a system, and this happens often in irrigation, it will allow any air that's entrapped in there at low pressure to escape the valve, and as soon as the pressure increases, the valve closes. So it actually stops any water from escaping from that point, but it eliminates any air that was in the pipeline.
So that goes at a fairly high point.
That goes at any high point in a main line, yeah, correct. And then we've got a triple effect version where, or in fact in New Zealand they'd call it double effect, where effectively it does exactly the same as this one, but if the air bubble is under pressure, it will actually allow the valve to open and burp just that bubble.
That's pretty clever.
Okay, so it's getting rid of entrapped pressure air, and it has quite an effect over how the main line performs.
So there must be little valves or something in there.
Yeah, if we have a look, luckily they undo reasonably well.
Yeah, they do.
But effectively there is a polystyrene float in here, which is actually going up against, you can see a rubber gasket at the top. So what happens is that as the water causes this to float up, it floats up and closes the valve. And in this case, because this is simple action, assuming that the float is not floating, it will pass air, and as soon as the water gets in there, it goes and closes.
Simple but effective.
Fairly simple, but very effective. And this is the closing face here. And of course, there's a very big surface in the top of the unit.
And you've got two different sizes.
Well, actually, there's a number of sizes from 20mm up to 2 inch, and you can imagine at 2 inch, this is passing a lot of air. So they are sized depending on what the pipeline is. So for a big pipeline, you will end up with a bigger version of these.
Would you have more than one on a system?
Yes, you may have a number spaced at 500 or 600 metres apart along a long main line. At each point you are wanting to evacuate any air. But it's also about how fast the water is actually travelling along that pipeline. If the velocity of the water is high, it will tend to carry any air bubbles and other things with it. As the velocity decreases in a pipeline, the air starts to build up. So as the air builds up, actually the water has to go faster across this portion of the pipeline, therefore we end up with a pressure loss.
So what happens when you turn the pump off?
Essentially in a system, when you turn the pump off, the water is going to continue moving in the direction that it is going. Okay, so what will tend to happen is that if you don't have something that can allow air in, it'll actually cause the pipe to suffer a vacuum situation. And if the pipe is thin in the wall, it'll go and suck flat. So this is also the action of these devices. So they allow air to pass into the pipeline and actually fill the void of the water that's travelling along the pipeline. So essentially eliminating those issues.
So both ways?
Absolutely. So these are vacuum breakers as well as air release valves. And then in this one here, which is the dual effect or triple effect as they call it, essentially it has a slightly different float in here. So the float also has a port in the top of it, which allows pressure air to actually also come out of the system.
John, wool has become the great white hope.
Has it?
I think it has.
Good. I'm very pleased to hear
basically,
that.
there's, you guys are doing quite well compared to a lot of other sectors.
Well, it's been a better season, I have to say. We're coming to the end of it now. We've only got, well, it officially ends at the end of June, 30th of June. It's interesting, we've been through the peak supply months of sort of January through to April, and the market's held up very well, and I think there is a chance of actually seeing a bit of appreciation
now until the end of the season, basically on the back of reduced supplies, and the currencies had a play in there. And I'm pleased to say that just in recent weeks we've done a lot of good business in Europe. China has actually been pretty quiet the last 6 or 8 weeks, but that has been taken up by markets outside China, which is a very positive thing.
Yes, is that sort of new clients?
I wouldn't say new, but I'd say maybe, if anything, they're buying more New Zealand wool. But the gratifying thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that it's good to have, as far as the wool market is concerned, it's good not to be relying on one dominant market.
Different baskets for your eggs.
Different baskets for our eggs. And China last season represented probably 50% of New Zealand exports. It'll be down this season. I would suggest it's still major, but it could be down to 35, 40 or something around there. But the wool's been marketed elsewhere, so it's good for us. It's good for the wool industry. It's good that we can, not be totally reliant on one major market as we've done in the past.
You haven't mentioned the States for a while.
The States, a lot of end product goes into the States. From our own company point of view, we used to export a lot of, a good share of the carpet wool into the States. It wasn't a big market. There's been a lot of talk over the decades how it's the hope, but it's not a
It hasn't really fired.
Well, finished product it has, but it's never been a wool market. It's a very much a man-made fibre market for all the reasons that we know. But it's interesting, the wool that we were sending into the States, now we send it to Bangkok, where it's spun, processed, and the product will go to the States. And that's been a trend that we've seen in some of these markets like the US over the decades. That's exactly what's happened. So it's not that they're not buying wool, they're just getting
They're getting somebody else to do it for them.
Correct, and getting the product.
Well, as long as they're using New Zealand wool at the other end.
They are using it. It's a niche. It's become very niche, high value products. So they're there. But the Europeans have always had an affinity for wool, basically, as have the Chinese. They've always had they understand wool. Of course, I think the environment story is still very large and getting probably more important in some parts of Europe. And wool certainly has a major advantage. The flammability issues, the story about man-made fibres emanating from oil, oil-based.
Yep, and it's renewable, and people are taking that on board now.
Increasingly so, and we're starting to see that more and more with some of these European customers. They're telling the story, and it's all coming back, and at the end of the day, we're benefiting. Well, the person that's growing it is benefiting from it.
It's rather nice when somebody else actually tells your story.
Correct, absolutely.
Yeah. So without putting anything out there, the next season does look okay.
Yes, it does. I think you'll find, if you go back to last season, supply conditions in the South Island were very tight up to January, so that kept the price situation very stable and kept the market quite healthy in the South Island. The same wasn't so much the same in the North, but look, fundamentally speaking, I don't see why things should change too much. If something major happened to the world economies, if something happened where people had to really rein back their spending or whatever, and of course what we're talking about, a lot of the products that do emanate from New Zealand wool, there's certainly things that can be put off till next year, you know what I mean? So barring something like that, barring a huge spike in the currency or something like that, which
or Donald Trump getting the presidency,
something happening like that, I can't see any reason why we shouldn't be optimistic for the next season.
Fabulous. Very, very briefly, I guess your major concern is amount of supply.
Supply, particularly in the South Island, wool supply generally is still tracking down a little. The dairy thing you would have thought would help stabilise that, and it probably will, but it'll pan out over a time period. Brilliant, John. Thank you very much indeed. Now, if you'd like to have another look at John's interview or any of the others on the program, just go to our website, which is ontheland.co.nz. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you did just miss the program, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.